I'm not a fan of violence, but today I'll make an exception because we're going to talk about punching in. The dad jokes are strong with this one. Today I want to talk about when you're recording, there are ways to, let's say you've recorded something and you want to punch something in. You want to take a phrase, let's say, and record over it. You got a better one in you and you want to record that in. You could do that by recording everything to different takes, different layers, and then comping that together later. But sometimes you're in the moment and you're feeling like you got it in you. You just need to record it again, but you don't need to do the full take. The full take was great. You just need to punch in a couple of spots. That's where punching in can be helpful. Now, if you started recording, a couple, 3 decades ago on tape machines, you're familiar with this concept. And on tape, it was kind of nerve-wracking because if the engineer pressed record at the wrong time, a little too early, a little too late, you would hear it. You would hear a blip. And then you'd have to either try punching again a little earlier, or perhaps you ruined it and you've got to punch in a bigger section, or maybe you got to re-record the whole thing. It was stressful. Not so with digital. Not so with Studio One. You can undo to your heart's content. But I want to show you 3 different ways that I punch things in, meaning I go into record briefly, momentarily, and I come back out of record. Okay? So let's jump in. Here is a vocal. I'm going to be doing some singing today. I've got a vocal track here. I'm going to switch to headphones. And what I want to do is punch in it's the very first phrase of a song. By the way, if you're a singer, you know the struggle. The very first phrase of a song feels like the hardest thing in the entire song. Even if it's easy to sing, there's something about just that first sound that comes out of your face. It can be difficult. So the first way I like to punch in is manually, where I literally just press record. Now, I never click the record button, although you could. I've got my record button mapped to, let me open up my keyboard shortcuts and type in record. I've got record mapped to a couple of things. Okay, the default is number pad star. So if you have a keyboard that has a number pad, the star button, actually I've got one. For me, at least on this keyboard, the star is up above the 9 key. So you could press that. So a lot of the transport controls are mapped to this number, what's it called? Number pad? My laptops don't have it typically. And my keyboard in front of me also does not have it, which makes me a little sad that it's not a default keyboard shortcut that I can access from my keyboard. However, it's easy to remap keyboard shortcuts in Studio One, and so I've mapped mine to this key, which is it backslash? I think it's backslash, which is just above my return key, just to the right of the bracket keys. So keep in mind brackets for a second, but this is my keyboard shortcut. How do we do this? You just come into the keyboard shortcuts, which is in Preferences under General and the Keyboard Shortcuts tab. Search for the command you want. For me, I want it to, this window's too small. For me, I want the record function right there, record. Select it, and then I just want to enter a key. I'm not going to get rid of this one because I may use it one day. It's fine. We can have multiple shortcuts for same command. So I click in this thing where it says enter key, and I just press the key that I want and hit assign. Okay, it assigned it there. I didn't want to do that. Okay, I said I didn't want to get rid of it, and then I got rid of it. How would I fix that? Page down is okay, never. Forget about it. This is how you assign it. I'm never going to use that number pad thing anyway. So, actually, I canceled it out. It didn't save because I didn't click apply. So here it is. Let's actually figure this out. If this is gone, how do I add it without replacing it? I think I have to deselect it. If it's selected, it will replace it. If it's not selected, my guess is it will add it to it. Yeah, now we're cooking with grease. Okay, so now I've got my keyboard shortcut selected, and I mentioned the brackets. Let me show you what. Search for the word forward. I've shown this before. The forward bar command. So there's 2 kind of fast forward commands. There's just forward, which just scrolls forward at a constant rate. Then there's forward and rewind bar, which goes 1 measure at a time. I really like that way of doing it. It's more consistent with the way my brain kind of works. So I've got those mapped to the brackets. So to the right of the letter P on the keyboard, I've got left bracket, rewind, right bracket, fast forward, and then record. They're all kind of right there. So I can navigate like this. As I press these buttons, forward and back bracket, I'm moving forward and backwards by a measure, which is pretty handy. Like, go back 2 measures. Oh, okay, done. All right, so I've got my record button on this little backslash, I can't say that, backslash key, which means when I press it, if this track is record enabled, I press it to start recording. Record. Oh, it just did a pre-roll thing. Let's talk about pre-roll. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'll talk about pre-roll in a second, but down here in the very bottom of the window, there's this button right here that is mapped to the letter O key command on the keyboard. That is pre-roll. I'm going to turn that off for now because I'm going to show that to you as another thing that I use for punching in. But let's say I want to punch in this phrase right here. I just want to sing it again.
You know that there's something inside of you pumping. It's been there from birth.
So the phrase was, it's been there from birth, but I didn't really say the th very loudly. I could go in and edit that, but let's just say for the sake of argument, I want to record that again. So all I do is I come back a couple of measures. I could use my handy keyboard shortcut to do that. And I start recording. And when I'm ready to start singing, I press the record button. So I start playback over here, and then I press record when I want to sing, and then I press record when I'm done. So here we go. Here we go. 3.
You know that there's something inside of you pumping. It's been there from birth. It beats
So I emphasize the th.
from birth.
It's too much, but you get the idea. Okay, that is the way that I do punching most of the time, especially when I'm singing, because I'm typically, I'll be honest, I'll confess, I typically sing right here. I may stand up, but I'm right here in this position, partly because I've got acoustic treatment to the left and right of me, so it's actually a good sounding spot, but also so I have access to everything. I can see the screen, and I have my keyboard right here to control it. So I'll just, if I'm sitting and being real lazy, I'll just sit here and do exactly what I just did and press the button. Keep in mind the buttons are loud, so you want to push them quietly, and choose your spots carefully, or otherwise every time you punch in, you'll hear a little click sound on your keyboard, or maybe don't use a big, loud mechanical keyboard like I have. It's too loud. Switch to something that's more quiet. But or use something like the transport controls on a fader port. Does the same thing. But I'm just able to punch that in. And so it can be as big as that punch in, or if I undo it, I could just do the birth, the word from birth at the end, something like this.
And inside of you pumping, it's been there from birth.
And that can be surprisingly effective. One cool thing that Studio One does, when you punch in, it puts a crossfade there. That makes it much more likely that you're not going to have any clicking on that transition point between. It's good practice to crossfade these things always, but Studio One does it for you, so you don't even have to manually do it. But that should probably sound pretty good.
Been there from birth.
Gets a little loud, but I can match the volume.
Been there from birth.
And you'll notice that there's a little crossover. I started singing the F here, and I hit punch here. I wish I had punched in slightly earlier. But I can actually retroactively fix this if I've selected this setting in, where is it, under Audio? Yes. If you go to Preferences, go to the Advanced tab, go to the Audio tab. I just said that so country. Go to the Advanced tab. Come down here to where it says Pre-Record Audio Input, and just turn that on. Set it to 1 minute, which I think is the max. Make sure this is on. And what it does, I've done video on this before, it's secretly recording all the time. Like, it's recording even if you're not recording, and it keeps a buffer of the last minute of you talking, so you can access that later if you need to. Here's an example. I'm going to press record now. Now I'm recording over here on the right-hand side of my song. Check out what happens. This is what I just recorded. Now I'm recording over here. Look what happens when I pull this back to the left. So you can access that later if you need to. Here's an example. I'm going to press record now. I had not pressed record, and it was just recording underneath the hood. So that means if you're like between takes and you play something awesome, sing something awesome, and someone says, oh man, you should do that in the song, you could say, hit record real quick, and then just stop record and then drag it back. If you did it in the last 60 seconds, it'll be recorded. Lovely. It's a really cool. It's like the retrospective record MIDI feature that we have, but it's for audio. And since I'm an audio guy, I very much like that. So let's go back to our example. Here you can hear there's two different F sounds. There's one from the first take and one from the punch in. It kind of goes, I don't like that. So what I can do is I can just, if I click down here, I'm adjusting the crossfade, which also adjusts the edges. So I can go something like this or like this. I can find the spot that sounds better. Let's try that. Yeah, that sounds natural. I just needed to move that a little bit. Turns out I moved it that way, but because of retrospective record, or whatever that thing's called, pre-record audio input, I could drag this back even further than where I pressed the record button, and that's really handy. Because if I had, let me show you. I'm sorry, I've already demoed this, but it's worth showing again. Oh, look, I go back to where I was. I hit undo too many times. Let's say I try to punch this in again, and I punch in too late.
It's been there from birth.
I punched in too late. I wasn't paying attention.
From birth.
That's terrible. But because of that setting, I can still drag this back and put it at the exact right punch in spot. Something like that, maybe.
From birth. From birth.
Whatever. That's not good, but you get the idea. I could drag that back as far as I want. I can go back to that phrase if I want.
It's been there from birth.
Pretty cool. Okay, so that was a little sideshow, but that's really fun and interesting. If you didn't know that existed, I might have just blown your mind. You're welcome. Okay, that's the first method of punching in, is just the boring old manual version. I do that a whole lot, especially when I'm singing. The next version is to add pre-roll to the equation. Talked about pre-roll before. Again, it's the letter O on the keyboard to turn it on and off. And there's a button down here that symbolizes pre-roll, I think, technically. But if we click on this wrench here on the metronome, it actually gives us something we can control. You can turn pre-roll on and off by checking this button here. So the O is turning that on and off. And you can say how many bars you want your pre-roll to be. I typically like 2 bars. For a slow song like this, 1 bar. We'll do 1 bar for this one. Typically, I like 2. What this does, in the way I've got it set up, is it's only pre-rolling when I'm recording. Pre-count means it counts in every time I press play. It'll, wherever I am, it'll go back a measure and count in 1 measure from there. I don't like that because every time I hit play, I'm going back too far. Pre-roll means it only does it when I'm recording. So that means if I'm right here and I want to punch in right, let's say right there, where we've been talking before, if I press record with pre-roll on, it's going to start playback from here. It's not going to start recording until it gets to this line, and then it'll record and move on from there. So let's just say that's the spot. I press record.
Know that there's something inside of you pumping. It's been there from birth.
It just punched it in for me. And everything else that we've done is true, and I stop recording by either pressing spacebar to stop playback or pressing the record button to stop recording. But it gives me that pre-roll. Why is this useful? If you need a very specific punch-in spot that you want to set up, it's useful for that. But bigger for me, it's if I'm playing guitar and I don't have time to like push the button while I'm playing, right? So I like to tell myself, all right, you got 2 bars, and I hit, let's go back, let's change the setting to 2 bars because that gives me enough time. So I'll hit record. I want to start recording here. Now I can go over here, grab the guitar, make sure it's turned up, get my fingers in the right place, loosen up a little bit, and then start recording right there. So it gives me 2 bars of kind of free time to noodle, to play, to do whatever, to get in the zone. And you can make it 4 bars, you can make it 8 bars, depending on what you're doing. If you're in a situation where you press record here and you're walking way over there and sitting at a drum kit, and so you need a nice long pre-roll before it starts recording, you could do that. You could also just start recording from earlier. But if you're punching in, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to like record over everything that happened before. That's where this punching in with pre-roll can be really handy. So it probably makes more sense to talk about it in context of somewhere in the middle of the song rather than the beginning. But that's super handy, and I use that a lot, especially with musicians. If I've got someone over there singing, they're not having to control anything, and they say, hey, can I get that 3rd line of verse 1 again? I'll click right here before the third line, and I'll say, yep, here's 2 bars.
It beats with your heart and it sets you apart and tells of your worth.
Here we go. And then they sing. And they sing right there. So it's a really fast workflow because it'll say, can I get that? I'll find it. I'll say, yep, 2 bars, and then I'll hit record. And I'm telling you, it's 2 bars before they have to start singing, so they kind of can gather their bearings. 2 bars works pretty well for that. Okay, so that's the second mode, is using pre-roll. Okay, the third method is called auto punch. If you look down here in the bottom, just below the quick punch button, if you just hover over this one, you'll see it's called auto punch, and you use the letter I to select it. So I and O are right next to each other. And these, you can't do both. You are either going to do pre-roll or auto punch, or neither. I've shown you what pre-roll does. Let me show you what auto punch does. Pre-roll allows you to start recording automatically. Auto punch allows you to start and end the recording automatically. And the way it does that is by making a selection using the loop tool in Studio One. So across the top here, if you click and drag just above the timeline, you can create a selection using the looper. Now, the loop doesn't have to be on. Currently, this loop is not actually looping. We could turn that on by pressing / or is that backslash? That's /.
Been there from birth.
That's how looping normally works, but you can also turn the loop off and use the loop range to set up the area that you want to use for your punch. So here's how that would work. Let's say I want to punch in just these 2 words here, and I need to be out over here. And let's say I'm doing it on guitar, so I can't be there pushing the record button to punch in and punch out. All I have to do is turn on auto punch by pressing I, and then making my selection with the loop range, and then I just need to rewind back wherever I want to start from, let's say right here, and I just have to press record from here. So normally, when you press record from a section like this, it starts recording right away. If you have auto punch enabled, you press record, it doesn't start recording until it gets to that start point of that loop point, and then it stops recording at the end of the loop point, all hands off, all automatically. Let's see how that works. I'm going to press record.
You know that there's something inside of you pumping. It's been there from birth. It be
Hands-free automation. All the other things we talked about are still true, but now I can punch in very specific sections.
Some say it's a calling, but it feels.
So let's say I want to punch in just that phrase.
Some say it's a calling, but it feels.
I'll show you an actual kind of an advanced technique you can do. You can have the loop range follow your selection. I haven't used it in a long time. I forget where to cursor follows position. It must be under preferences. See, we're learning together. If we go to preferences, under editing, it should be maybe it's under audio. Huh. Okay, I found it. This happens sometimes when you have a deep software with lots of options. Sometimes it's hard to find the setting. If you right-click down here in the transport, there are a couple of options. One of them is loop follow selection, which is mapped to Command Option P, so you can turn that on and off. If I press that, there's no visual indication that it's happening. But what happens is, if that's on, then whenever I create a selection, it automatically moves the loop to follow that. If you do a lot of work with the loop, with the looper, either doing what we're doing right now or using it for actual looping, that may be interesting. It also, if I click a selection, it does the same thing. So it loops whatever is selected either by clicking it or by dragging over it. But that might be helpful for setting your in and out points if you want to do it looking at the audio rather than clicking up here. So something like this.
You apart and tells of your work.
Say I just want to get that tells in, but not anything else. I could select that, come back here, press record.
Hard, and it sets you apart and tells of your worth.
So you just kind of sing through it, and then the edit, you can edit the in and out points if you need to, but it should work just fine.
Hard and tells of your worth.
Okay, not perfect, but you get the idea. This is especially, I don't use auto punch for vocals, but I do use it if there's a section of guitar, for example, that I want to punch in and punch out, and I know that for sure. This is the one I use the least, even though it's the coolest from a technological standpoint. I don't use it all that much. In order of usage is what I've shown you today. I manually punch in a lot because Studio One's audio engine is just really great for that kind of thing. And then I use the pre-roll second most, and then I use the auto punch occasionally. Also, just so you know, one of the things I loved about Studio One from the very beginning was how robust the audio engine is. So I'm going to turn off auto punch. The fact that I can rewind, fast forward, record, and do all that without ever stopping playback it's really inspiring for me. So for example, I can do something like this.
Some say it's a call, some say it's a calling, but it feels more like falling.
No, undo, rewind.
Some say it's a calling, but it feels more like falling, and you might get hurt. Say it's a call, but it feels more like falling, and you say it's a calling, but it feels more like falling, and you might get hurt.
So that's not a good punch, it's not a good example, but the idea of I did all that without ever stopping and listening. So I could have recorded, punched in, like a lot of times if I do a vocal and I'm doing a punch in section, I never stop hearing music. I'll just hit the rewind a few times, punch it in, and then rewind. So I'll literally do, let me do one for you more seriously.
Cannot ignore it, there's no place to store it except in your word. You cannot ignore it, there's no place to store it except in your work. Cannot ignore it, there's no place to store it except in your work. Except in your work.
Something like that. I'll listen, I'll rewind, listen again, I'll rewind, punch it in, I'll rewind, listen to that, and if I'm happy, I'll let it continue. And I can go in and I can do the edit points and all of that while music is still playing. To me, is that a deal breaker if the system didn't have that? No, but I found it to be such a helpful tool to keep me kind of immersed in the music and not to lose that vibe. It kind of creates a sense of urgency and a sense of seriousness that I like. And I think sometimes as musicians, we need to be kind of backed into corners to force us to get the work done. So hope this was helpful for you. Hope you got at least one idea that you're going to try. If so, leave a comment and let us know which one was your favorite or which one you already use. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. See ya.